Now, this week, the NASDAQ is down 4%, just under 4%, 3.98% to be exact. It is now down 5.87% from the top, which we had that top the previous week. I told you we would likely get a wide range bar this week. And if we did, you would have an evening star reversal in the weekly time frame. I've been warning you about the divergences. I warned you the NASDAQ weekly chart was right at this parallel boundary with the low here from the pandemic to our low here in 2022, making a nice channel, also reaching this level here. Again, another nice channel here with our linear scaling. I've been warning you about the rising wedge with the log scaling. And again, we had a 4% drop, 5.8. We had the topping tail the previous week. Then they're going to set up a lower high. We did. And then we had another significant drop this week after lower. And again, well, no possible way this happens. But what's happening? The tech sell-off is happening. The AI sell-off is happening. And it is very likely that NVIDIA and the semiconductors have peaked. If so, it's very possible the NASDAQ has peaked, as I've been saying. I've been warning. Putting in a major top. Why do I say that? We are going to go higher. Channel I've been talking about on the S&P 500. Overthrow it or go up to it. We overthrew that level. We're forming now a rising wedge. We're going to go higher. And the rally was going to be sold, and we were going to see distribution begin as a topping process forms because of a Fed pivot is coming. That Fed pivot is likely going to be in September. I believe that all my heart, that the Fed is going to pivot in September. The other central bankers have already begun to do so. It's very possible that we attempt to recover next week ahead of the Fed meetings in a week and a half. We do go back and try to fill the gap on the NASDAQ. S&P still might try to make a new high. A larger divergence between the two. It's highly probable that the NASDAQ has peaked if NVIDIA and the semiconductor ETF, which I've been talking about constantly, you over and over, that NVIDIA has likely peaked. So the NASDAQ's going to sell off. What's happening? The NASDAQ's selling off sharply. 5.87% rally that I told you about 2 weeks ago that was going to fail. All the warning signals, the sell signals that began to show up with that rally at the highs. Told you about those signals. Rallied up on lighter volume, and we had the rally continue on lighter volume with the Independence Day, surrounding the Independence Day holiday. So again, this is playing out. Now people are shocked that it's happening because they were so complacent. This is the NASDAQ linear scaling. This is our log scaling, and I told you again we have a nice looking rising wedge with the log scaling from the peak over here and connecting the high that we just made here. And again, the divergence is present here on the MACD. Again, by the time the MACD rolls over, we're going to have a pretty big drop. Could get a rebound, but I told you we might hang out around the highs for a little while. We did. We rallied. Then we had the doji the previous week, popping tail, the doji spinning top-looking candlestick, and then we sold off this week. I told you last week, before we ever started this week, to be watching for a star reversal, a wide range bar, followed by a spinning top, followed by, which is a narrow range bar, followed by a big ugly red bar, which we got this week dropping 4%, 5.87% from the highs. You have a bearish rising wedge. Good chance the market is a major reversal, as we've been warning about. Also warned you we were going to go higher before we went lower. Formed these divergences. It's now happened. Beautiful diversions right here on the MACD here on the weekly chart for the NASDAQ. I warned you that we had doji spinning top looking candlestick and that we would likely get a red, big, ugly, nasty red bar this week. We talked about this at great length and detail last weekend as this candle had set up. We talked about this on Friday over the weekend, talking about a possible top with a topping tail. We had topping tails right here, but I told you candlesticks mean nothing unless they are confirmed. Over here, we had more sell signals, signs of a reversal. This time it played out. Here, there was no confirmation. It was that there was distribution. Again, the retail investors, that's what the topping tails are, and topping tail and reversal bar. Seeing distribution. Again, the retail investors are buying, and they're going to buy the dip. point, NVIDIA is going to try to rebound back up. Right now it's testing the 50-period moving average and the semiconductors, so they got hammered. We get a rebound back up to fill the gap. If we do, we can get a lower high, another lower high here, and you'll have a series of lower highs. Should we do that? May just keep dropping, but again, I think that we'll probably go a little bit lower on Monday on NASDAQ. S&P may have bottomed. We had a bullish falling wedge there. Break out and attempt to back test. If we go lower on NASDAQ, I'll be watching if we attempt to rebound going into this week ahead of the coming week here, ahead of the Fed with earnings. We're going to get a boatload of earnings next week, and then going on into the Fed getting a lot of earnings. So that might give us a relief rally, but you have a reversal. You have a 3-week reversal pattern here that is now complete. Now we need confirmation, which would be a close below this week's low, and then eventually a follow through that I think will eventually take us below the 20-week. The question now is, do we go back and try to fill the gap, or do we just keep going before we get any kind of meaningful bounce? Now I think got a good shot at filling the gap, but listen carefully. There's no guarantee we do that. It's a gap and go. My guess is we're pushing down. We're going to go back up, fill the gap. NASDAQ's going to make a lower high. S&P is going to make another higher high probably because it gapped right at the peak. And then I think you're going to see a much, much bigger decline on NASDAQ should we bounce. But listen to me. The signals remain bearish. There's no guarantee we bounce. Now, not only did we get a reversal pattern with the NASDAQ, we've got a 3-week reversal pattern, wide range bar, doji, and then the wide range bar for the sell-off, an evening doji star. That's a reversal pattern. You got it on the Russell. You got a topping tail in the form of a shooting star. You got it on both the Russell and the Dow. We had these rallies earlier in the week. Options expiration, again, boom, reversal bar. The bull market's going to keep going. We're just seeing rotation. It's the biggest bull trap in history, the Russell. The Russell rally on the Russell rally and the Russell with the Dow taking place to disguise what was going on with the distribution with the NASDAQ and with NVIDIA and the semiconductors. This week, the Dow rose up by nearly 1,400 points in 1 week. 375 points. It gave the majority of it back. We still ended with a small gain, 286 points out of the 375 that we're up. We gave back 1,089 points. Now, the Dow was still up nearly 0.75%, up 0.72. The Dow was up nearly 3.5% for the week. It closed at 40,000, went all the way to 41,000, almost 400. Up for the week, nearly 3.5%. We still closed higher by 0.72%. After a 1,375 point rally, we gave back 1,089 points of it to get this topping tail in the form of a shooting star. Again, retail investors have been buying. The institutions, they're selling. Up on lighter volume, and then we're seeing distribution volume. But you did get a topping tail here. Again, the candlestick means nothing unless it is confirmed and gets a follow through. If we try to rally back up to fill the gaps on the S&P and NASDAQ, then we'll be watching to see, do we get a up before we turn back down? Let's keep dropping and get a sharp reversal. We'll be watching to see which way it plays out for the Dow and the Russell with the topping tails and the doji star 3-week pattern for the NASDAQ. By the way, the Dow turned right off of this channel that we had from these two peaks right here. We slammed right into it and we reversed hard. We'll be watching that. And we'll be watching the topping tail to see if it holds. Again, candlesticks have to be confirmed. By the way, at the last two peaks, the peak right here and the peak right here, we're slamming up into a trend line going back 125 years to 1899. Hit it once, we turned off of it, and we came up and we hit it again. And this is a long-term trend line. Just let me show you the Dow weekly real fast because I want to show you this. Here's the Dow weekly. Again, we just slightly overthrew this trend line ever so slightly. Got that topping tail. Again, previously we had turned off this trend line right here with that peak, got above it, and now we're stalling here at this trend line, forming again a multiple point triple negative divergence on the Dow. The same divergence forming on the Awesome Oscillator. So topping tail that marked the January 2022 top over here. We just got a similar candlestick here this week with our sell-off that we had there on Thursday and Friday. I warned you that we were going to get a rally up to the trend lines on the weekly chart, either overthrow them or reverse off of them, through them on light volume, and we got this double sequence count sell signal. I talked about this 3 weeks ago. I warned you before the 9 count ever formed that we were possibly going to get that with the 8 of the 9 and the 7 of the 9 there that we talked about this count leading up to it completing. It did complete. We went just a little bit higher, and that was it. Couldn't close above it, and you're now reversing. Again, good chance the NASDAQ has peaked. NVIDIA has. People get so complacent, they didn't see the distribution, they didn't see the warning signs. People get so complacent. You got the 20-week moving averages, again, that we very well could have bottomed at the 20-week moving averages for a lower high or a higher high. That's the way it works out in the weekly time frame. We got the higher high. Told you if we're going to go up higher, we're going to go up the upper channel line or overthrow it and refine it, up redefining it and hitting the other trend line, forming a rising wedge. S&P 500, a rising wedge on the NASDAQ. But this was present on both here, the NASDAQ chart, the S&P weekly chart. And again, the S&P still may attempt to try to fill that gap, overall topping process, but you had the 13.9, you went a little bit higher, and now you're starting to see this volatility. These 9 counts on the weekly charts, I talked about the 9 counts marking reversals or going a little bit higher and turning. Monthly time frame, the S&P is getting an 8 of a 9. Again, possible topping tail this month. If we rally up and then come back and close right where we're at, you're going to get it. 9 count may be the high early on next month, right after the Fed meeting on July 31st. But you have a 13.9 on the monthly chart. Possible reversal. 9 count does not have to be the high of the count. It could be bar 8, which again, it'll be a perfected signal because bar 8 is the high of the count so far, even if the 9 count isn't the high of the count. Again, I've been warning you about this NASDAQ. Again, got a 9 count this month. Again, even if we rebound back up, we'll see if we get by the end of the month a topping tail or some other kind of reversal candle. If NASDAQ has peaked, signals remain bearish, they turn back to bullish momentum, or the signals turn back to bullish if we just go up and get another lower high filling the gap. We'll be watching. Signals remain bearish. We could continue lower. My guess is we're going to try to get some kind of recovery type of rebound. We'll see what happens. But again, guarantee that we get that right now. Just saying we're hitting some support levels. Talking about my next video. Monthly chart of the S&P, or I'm sorry, the monthly chart of NASDAQ getting a 9 count sell signal. We're getting a 9-9 reversal pattern. S&P is setting up a 13-9 reversal pattern as well. Now leave the Dow out of this. Again, the Dow in its monthly time frame getting a 13.9, a 9 bar this month. So again, very good chance the market is going to try to peak this month or maybe next month with the S&P 500, beginning of the month right after the Fed tries to fill that gap. We'll see what happens. There's a good chance. Chart of reversal. These candles are warning of price exhaustion. Monthly chart of the Dow here. Not only did NASDAQ get the 9 count on the weekly chart, warning that this was going to happen, is it getting a 9 count on the monthly chart, but you had it on the daily chart, and I warned you that we had that happen. It was a weekly chart we were just looking at of the 9 count there, but we had it happen here on the daily chart. And again, you had a 9-9 over here, didn't get perfected, but that gave us this. Then we have a 9 here, and now another 9-9 signal here, and that has given us this. You got a possible head and shoulders. I'll talk about this in my next video. Again, we could drop a little bit lower to the 50-period moving average and the lower Bollinger Band and maybe try to bounce, or maybe try to bounce here at this level that we're at right now. I'll be watching. You got a 7 of a 9 count. So if we continue to have every bar below the bar from 4 bars to go, we'll complete a 9 count on Tuesday. We'll see if we do that surrounding earnings or not. Maybe we find a bottom on Monday or Tuesday. If we don't, try to rally immediately. I'll be watching the 7 and 9 count. It doesn't have to complete, but it may. They don't always complete. Again, this marked the top, and what do? We turned immediately. And again, we reversed July 11th. The market likely peaked, and I think I said in this video and yesterday, I got my date wrong. July 10th is the peak. July 10th, that's possible. That is the top. And July 11th is the reversal bar. And now we've taken out the 10 and now the 20-period moving average. We'll see if we find support surrounding the 50-period. That's where the semiconductors are and NVIDIA. If we do, then we'll be watching. Do we go back and fill the gap? I'll be talking about this. Do we go back and fill this gap right here and maybe get a slanted neckline, or maybe we bounce right here. Maybe we bounce right here, and you've got a nice-looking head and shoulders pattern that begins to try to set up. And maybe it's a little lopsided. That's okay. They're not perfect, But if we go back and fill that gap and get a Fibonacci retracement, that's certainly a possibility. No guarantee the pattern sets up. No guarantee we fill the gap. Great Scott, did you hear what I said? No guarantee. My signals are bearish. But if we try to bounce off the horizontal support or the gap fill here, or I'm sorry, the 50 or the gap fill down here, we'll be watching to see if we attempt to get some kind of recovery. And if so, do we attempt to fill that gap? We may not fill it until a later date. We may not fill it at all. Or it's been a gap and go. Signal I warned you about, hey, that was a great signal. This video I'll be talking about, and this is the NASDAQ, I'll be talking about the sell signals that formed at that time that I warned you before this happened that it was going to happen. But I also warned you we were going to go higher first on those weekly charts to complete the divergences. People get so complacent when it happens, they get shocked all over social media. We rally back up to try to fill the gaps, they'll get complacent even more. Listen, there's no guarantee we fill those gaps. The signals are bearish. We can continue lower. We see momentum shift back up. But again, you got a possible rebound off the 50-period moving averages with NVIDIA, the semiconductors, and NASDAQ. Now, we don't have red bars for the weekly chart here with our awesome oscillator. Times you start getting red bars and prices attempt to recover with the first of red bars. Times you start getting red bars and you get further selling and then attempt some kind of recovery. Again, we've got gaps to be watching. Maybe we fill them, maybe we don't. We're going to be watching these divergences very closely. You got momentum turning negative with the stochastic now, and I'll be watching for red awesome oscillator bars going into next week. But we got the evening star reversal that I've been talking about for the NASDAQ. S&P 500. The S&P 500, beautiful divergence forming on the awesome oscillator and the MACD. No red bar yet. We're probably going to get one next week, but we could see a red bar and still attempt a recovery. Watching. We had these big moves down. We had the rally on the Russell and the Dow. Russell's the biggest bull trap in history. Topping tails on both. This is the S&P weekly here. There's the Dow. It had a big, massive rally on the Dow. Masquerading distribution that was going on with tech. Then Thursday we began to see the sell-off with that, and it gave us this topping tail on the weekly chart. Do you see this? Do you see the negative divergence, multiple point negative divergence on the Dow that is forming? Okay, again, we may try to rally back up. We have an evening star reversal on the NASDAQ and the topping tail from the previous week. This last week we got a topping tail on the Dow and on the Russell with these negative divergences. So again, Dow had a rally, gave the majority of it back. So Dow weekly chart also looks identical. The Russell, again, has had this rally. Again, another topping tail, form of a shooting star just like the Dow. We got the green, but you've got, again, the divergence that's forming here. We're moving to a new high. The awesome oscillator and the MACD are not. Still nowhere near the peak back over here. This is the biggest bull trap in history on the Russell. You got these zombie companies that are artificially propped up on with debt, by borrowing. That's what they call them, zombie companies. These are going. A lot of these companies are going to end up being moved from the exchange. We saw the .com stocks fall by the wayside. A lot of these companies should never even be on the exchanges. They shouldn't be public. They just survive by debt. See a lot of these companies fall by the wayside. Next, with the next recession and the downturn in the economy. Weekly chart of the Dow and the Russell. Russell here, again, getting topping tails. I warned you with the topping tails with NASDAQ, we had begun to see distribution. Those candlesticks did not get confirmed, and then we rallied up. With the 4th of July holiday, Independence Day, we rallied up on extremely light volume. The following week, we peaked. We saw more distribution that week with the topping tail, and now we get more distribution here. Again, these little red arrows are telling us that the big money, the smart money, is selling into the rally. Rather than a top for a corrective move like here or over here, it's likely going to trigger a reversal like over here, or forming a reversal, if you will, major resistance levels that I've talked about with negative diversions. But this is telling us right here, again, distribution over the last few weeks has been underway. Retail investors have been buying it up. Institutions have been selling. That's why I warned you ago when my sell signals formed, actually I started seeing it the prior 2 weeks. We started seeing the sell signals begin to form on the NASDAQ. Those signals are now playing out. I warned you, Bitcoin had already sold off. I warned you Bitcoin was bottoming and it was going to rebound back up. Well, guess what? Bitcoin bottomed out when I said it was going to bottom out. It's rebounded back up, and now we're seeing the distribution we saw with Bitcoin. And again, the stock market is now going to play catch up to Bitcoin. Bitcoin too is in a topping process, but it's forming a negative divergence with the market in all likelihood. As we see the weekly signals turn back to bullish, which Bitcoin already up a 20-week, and now it's rallying back up, testing it, got to flip the signals back to bullish to turn it around. You're watching that, but it's likely in a topping process, probably diverging with the stock market. And surprise, surprise, distribution, another warning sign of distribution. Again, as we're getting the topping tails and we rallied up on lighter volume, again, another warning sign of distribution. Still have a gap near the high, and if NASDAQ attempts to go back and fill the gap, S&P still might go to a new high. It's sold off a whole lot. NASDAQ has sold off a whole lot harder than S&P. Already diverged. We might get a larger divergence develops, probably be better seen on the weekly chart. Similar to what we had back in 2022 where the S&P went up and it made a new high, NASDAQ made a lower high. The jury is still out on whether NASDAQ has or S&P has peaked because it did get a gap lower near the high, at the high. Probably that gap's going to get filled. NASDAQ well off the highs. The distribution I've been warning you about, again, I told you we were going to go higher, likely overthrow that upper boundary of the channel. And I told you it might change. They change all the time. Channels change all the time. We did that. We're getting the distribution. Signals have been bullish. I've been warning you. My signals are bullish. They're going to go higher, overthrow that upper channel line. But then I told you we were going to reverse. And up, we overthrew the channel line. Signals remain bullish. But now we've seen my signals turn back to bearish, and we're seeing the distribution. S&P weekly chart here, and that was the NASDAQ weekly chart I showed you a moment ago, both showing signs of distribution. Now, the NAAIM exposure index shows us what active money managers are doing. It has a divergence with the previous peak over here. And again, they go a little bit lower and attempt to rally to fill the gap ahead of the Fed or with the Fed, however it plays out. Because NASDAQ, the gap after we had a lower high, the S&P got the gap at the top. So the S&P still has a shot. We're going to fill the gap. Could see the exposure index begin to turn back up and get a divergence right here in the most recent price action like we had right over here. Maybe the S&P goes down to the trend line in the 10 and bounces, or maybe we just bounce. We got a bullish falling wedge. Maybe we just bounce with that low. NASDAQ moves lower. S&P doesn't diverge on the bottom. Maybe we'll see which way it plays out. This is assuming that we can attempt some kind of recovery next week or the week of the Fed. At some point in the next 2 weeks, if we can attempt a recovery, they're ahead of the Fed with earnings or with the Fed. But this is why I still think, again, we still may get another push higher on NASDAQ and, again, get a larger divergence between the NASDAQ and S&P, which they've already diverged. We just had a new high this week, S&P 500. NASDAQ made a lower high. And the divergence was present, multiple point divergence was present back up at the top here. We had a divergence. This happens again. The RSI still may again turn back up in this most recent price action for NASDAQ. Again, I think, S&P. I think NASDAQ's got a good shot that it's peaked. Well, NASDAQ was down nearly 4% for the week. S&P is down 2% for the week. S&P down 1.97%, nearly 2%, down 110 points. We had kind of a sloppy topping tail, but we had a rising wedge in the weekly time frame. The S&P overthrew the upper channel line, which I told you we were either headed to that trend line or we were going to overthrow it again. Channels change all the time, patterns change, and we went and we hit this trend line right here and slammed right into it. And you've got your rising wedge now, just like the NASDAQ. I warned you, we are going to go higher. Got some topping tails just above the trend line. They were not confirmed. We went up on a lighter volume with the holiday. We slammed into this trend line right here. The divergence is complete. Warned you again, if the awesome oscillator in the daily time frame, if we start turning back up on the awesome oscillator, the S&P may do something like this. where it goes back up and hits it one more time, and you get a divergence right there. And you get a divergence with the Fed if we try to rally back up into the Fed meeting in the next week and a half. Still got a good shot. We may fill the gap because the top was in and we gapped lower. So a good chance we're going to go up and try to fill that gap. NASDAQ likely peaked. That is if NVIDIA and the semiconductors have, because they follow. That follows conductors and NVIDIA. I told you that these divergences are forming, and again, by the time this MACD rolls over, again, we're gonna see a significant drop. But watching, is that it for the S&P, or do we get one more push higher? I think we can bottom out and try to rally. Listen to me carefully. No guarantee we go back up and fill those gaps. Just get some feeble rally at some point next week. We're going to turn down on Monday, bottom out, and I think we're going to start a rally going into the Fed meeting to go back and try to fill those gaps. If we do, P can make a new high surrounding the Fed a week and a half from now. NASDAQ can make another lower high, fill the gap, and then we can see another divergence form between the two and a total collapse. Now, not only do we have these rising wedges, these negative divergences, and it's not just the RSI and the MACD, it's everywhere. We talked about the RSI, the MACD, and the awesome oscillator, but we have it other places. Here, again, momentum is rolling over. You're getting it here. Again, just like we had back over here at the top right here, with the divergence that formed at the 2022 top and the bottom over here at the 2022 bottom. Same thing here. And here, it's hard to find an indicator that doesn't have a negative divergence on it with the S&P 500. Very, very difficult to find because they're everywhere. Now, again, the divergences are all over the place. Now, again, if we rebound, attempt to go back and fill the gaps on NASDAQ, they're going to tell us it's over, it's over, it's over. And again, same thing with NVIDIA. NVIDIA has a nasty looking ugly gap. The semiconductors, and they got whacked for the week. We're probably going to get a rebound at some point. Maybe that starts next week ahead of the Fed. And if we rally back up ahead of the Fed or with the Fed to fill those gaps with NVIDIA, the semiconductors, and the S&P, NASDAQ 100, you're likely going to set up a lower high. It's very likely that the NASDAQ has topped. I've been saying, I told you the sell-off was coming because I warned you Bitcoin had bottomed July 5th. I warned you the bottom had been forming on Bitcoin. Market is eventually going to try to play catch-up to Bitcoin, forming a larger divergence, which could be the case right now. It's soaring. I predicted that it would. Probably going to make another lower high in all likelihood. Huge red flag, the divergence that's formed in the S&P and Bitcoin, because that's what happened back at the 2022 top. But divergence is everywhere. NVIDIA down 8.75% this week. Oh, that wasn't supposed to happen. We were told it wouldn't happen. The divergence played out, and now NVIDIA has had a significant drop. We had the topping tail. I told you to look for a lower high, and we got another topping tail, and that's when the S&P hit the 78.6 Fibonacci previous week, and now that lower high, that reversal bar is now being confirmed. Again, we could go back and still attempt to fill the gaps before getting a follow-through move, and again, little double top patterns here with a lower high with NVIDIA, a higher high with the semiconductors, along with the NASDAQ. Now, this time it's different because it's AI. We can't go down because it's AI. It's going to change the world. Same stuff they were saying back at the bursting of the tech bubble with the dot-com stocks, the internet, and the tech stocks. It did change. Again, we got Apple getting the iPhone, but stop the bear markets from happening in 2007 to 2009 low there, and in 2000 to late 2002. It didn't stop the bear markets from happening. Again, NVIDIA is going to get competition. Going to drive them back down. NVIDIA is going to eventually go back, to 10 to 20 bucks or so, maybe, 10, 15, 20, something like that. The split. Probably end up losing 80 or 90% of its value. NVIDIA lost another 2.61% on Friday. Again, we had that nasty gap. I told you this was going to happen. I told you we had the rising wedge right here. We got that reversal with the bearish engulfing. It got confirmation with this little arrow right there. You can see that. And then we got the follow through with a lower low. And that also confirmed a lower high, lower low. I think this gap is going to get filled. And I told you that we could do it if we bounce off the 50. What are we doing? We're bouncing off the 50. NVIDIA's peak back over here on June 20th. Again, we're confirming a lower high and a lower low any rally back up. And we may not fill the gap until later, but if we attempt to do it now, and they've got a pretty good chance we may become oversold. Again, NVIDIA just lost nearly 9%. NASDAQ's lost 4% this week, and it's down 5.687%. So we'll see if we attempt to rally. Well, again, we could sell off with the Fed. We could rally back up, sell off with the Fed, get a summer sell-off into, okay, the Fed's going to pivot and maybe rally with that a little bit like we've done previously. Rally going into it, if we get something more like this, rally into it and then sell off with it. Herd believes that the Fed pivot is going to save the day and it's bullish, it's bearish, and it's going to usher in the bear market. Recession, or I did a video last weekend about the recession indicators. They're warning we're about to have a recession. It's about to happen. It hasn't happened yet. The Fed is doing their thing. The economy has been artificially propped up, government hiring and government spending. No amount of money can prevent a legitimate recession from happening, and now we have the warning signs. We're getting very, very close. The Fed will pivot. I think recession will come soon. You're going to see a negative quarter of GDP very soon. The evidence that the economy is slowing. Next week, we're going to get the inflation data on Friday, but we're going to get the GDP data on Thursday. We're going to get the GDP data for the second quarter. Expected to come in at 1.9%. Previous reading 1.4%. If this number comes in negative, or the next number, start pointing to a recession. I believe that either this quarter or the quarter that follows, which is the quarter we're in right now, this number is being reported for the second quarter that we just completed early on in the third quarter when you start the third quarter. The third quarter data, if this second quarter data doesn't go negative, or if it's a very weak number and eventually revised to a negative number, I believe this number or the next quarter, the third quarter, GDP will be negative, one or the other. 2 negative quarters of GDP validate a recession. So I think you're going to see it. The first negative quarter of GDP, either this quarter in quarter 2 or in quarter 3, I think you will get a negative quarter in one of those quarters. And then I think we'll see another negative quarter validate a recession whenever we get that first quarter. So I think it'll be the second or third quarter that we start seeing a negative number in GDP, which will be warning, again, recession is coming. Top of the many warning signs we already have. Plus, I digress. The Fed is going to start lowering rates because the economy is going to start slowing. The Fed, if you listen to Powell's Q&A, he was very concerned about a weakening economy. Doesn't need to be worrying about the high PCE data or the high PPI inflation data. Recession is coming. Powell said, well, we're going to dodge that bullet. Has to say that. It's very good and well a recession is going to happen. Let's go on the financial channels and say, oh no, we're going to have a soft landing on the Fed, and that's the as they're selling into the rally. That's the propaganda and the Kool-Aid for the retail investors. Been driving prices higher. Seeing the distribution, we've been seeing it for weeks now. So again, this is what I think is likely going to happen. And again, once we get the rate cut, I think we'll get some kind of rebound. I think we'll have a summer sell-off. We'll get a rebound into the fall, maybe late summer. Sell off with the Fed, but then I think we'll sell off into the election. Election uncertainty. We'll have an election. There'll be a big, big rally. Sell off in 2016 going into that election. When we had the election, there was a huge rally surrounding the hopes of the tax cuts. So I think we're going to see something like that. And I think the rally will take us into January or February, but I think we're going to get a sell off here going into the summer or some kind of rebound in the fall. And then I think, again, September, October, November, to the election, I think we start selling off, and then I think rebound November, December on into January. Then I think you're going to get a real big sell-off in 2025. But this is the topping process, and this is a good example. Again, NVIDIA and again NASDAQ and S&P are forming head and shoulder patterns as well, as I've talked about. Semiconductors down nearly another 3% on Friday. Again, just beyond the 200 period moving average. I told you we had a possible bottoming tail. Continue to sell. We tried to rally up initially with the Taiwan Semiconductor earnings, but good guidance, good earnings, a little bit of a pop, and then continue to sell. I think that, again, this gap over here, eventually we're going to move back to do it. Maybe we attempt to do that. It is possible. We try to do that surrounding the Fed. Again, eventually I do think that my target level here at 198 will be reached. But if we bounce around the 50 period, NVIDIA is testing the 50 period just above it. The semiconductors are just beyond it. So is NASDAQ. NASDAQ's just above the 50. I think the 50 could be tagged on Monday and a bottom and an attempt to fill these gaps. A very possible scenario that we bottom out on Monday. The NASDAQ with semiconductors and NVIDIA and come back and try to fill these gaps. Guarantee a possibility. Ultimately, this is what I think is happening. Again, I think we've already begun. I think the diversions with the bearish back-to-back, bearish engulfing candlesticks